At some point when selling your services, you will likely deliver a formal or informal presentation. Perhaps you'll be invited to speak at a conference as an expert speaker, or more informally at your local networking group as an introduction. This naturally raises the question, should I use visual aids? To which the answer may be, it depends. It depends upon your dynamism as a speaker, on the complexity of your topic, on the setting in which you deliver your talk, whether visual aids will save you words, for example, showing versus describing something. If the impact of the visual aids will be greater than the spoken word, and on the importance of relationship building during your talk. Probably, and somewhat unfortunately, the most popular form of visual aid is the PowerPoint presentation. During my years in corporate America, I can't count the number of slides I endured, saw. And in fact, I feel most grateful to be able to speak to you today and not have completely succumbed to death by PowerPoint. And I say this as a consultant. Boy, do we consultants love our PowerPoints. I was once involved in a PowerPoint presentation in Argentina that lasted an entire day. And sadly, I was one of the presenters, and I still feel guilty about what we did to that poor client. So, writing from the perspective of best practices and being on both sides of successful and unsuccessful presentations for close to 3 decades, here are some of the traps of using PowerPoint. First, thinking in PowerPoint. When you know you have to give a talk, if the first thing you do is open PowerPoint, then you're starting off all wrong. I can guarantee that you'll end up with way too many slides that will look way too busy. Second, writing complete sentences on slides and other reasons why you're using far too many words. A good slide should follow the 3-second rule of advertising. The audience needs to understand its meaning in 3 seconds. It is a visual aid, not the presentation itself. If they're reading the slide, they're not listening to you. Humans cannot multitask as much as we like to think we can. Third, poor design. Boring images, ugly pictures, unbalanced content, too many inappropriate fonts. Please, please, please do not use Comic Sans in a business presentation. Lack of visual alignment and too little white space are just some of the common design mistakes made by presenters. They're distracting to your audience and they'll undermine your message. Fourth, talking to your slides. This one is one of my personal favorite blunders, and I'm sure that you've seen it too. Rather than using slides as a visual aid and rehearsing their presentation so they know the content, the presenter instead puts all of their content up on their slides, and even if they don't read it word for word, they still use it as cliff notes to remember what they wanted to say. So they are looking at the slides rather than the audience. So what does the audience do? The presenter looks at the slides, the audience looks at the slides as well. They read along, they become frustrated that you aren't speaking as fast as they're reading. Fifth, putting entire lists on the same slide. If you intend to list 5 reasons for something and you put all 5 reasons on the same slide without transition effects, then when you're explaining reason number 1, your audience will have already read reason number 5 and they're bored. And the last one, this may be more of a fact when you're doing a physical presentation now than during Zooms, but also one of my favorite blunders is it's dark. Now, I was once involved in a marathon PowerPoint presentation that carried over from the morning until after lunch. And when we turned out the lights so the audience could see the slides, one of them actually fell asleep. I'm talking like snoring loudly level of asleep. It was thoroughly embarrassing. The trouble with using slides is that the room must at least be dimmed, which reduces your ability to maintain eye contact with your audience and increases the likelihood that they'll start sneaking peeks at their smartphones under the conference table or snoozing or otherwise not giving you their full attention. Have you ever seen the President of the United States use PowerPoint during his inaugural address? When Tony Robbins gets up in front of a stage to motivate thousands of people, he never takes his eyes off of them. Do you see him looking at PowerPoint? Of course not. Now, I'm not saying that you should never use PowerPoint. If your message is complex and requires a diagram, then by all means use slides. If you want to evoke emotion, and you should, and an image would help do that, then use slides. If you're speaking to a large room where eye contact with everyone is impossible and you'd like some visual aids, then use slides, maybe. But do consider these best practices when you're constructing your slides. First, and most important, construct a storyboard outside of PowerPoint. Now, this is the secret of some of the greatest presenters, as it allows you to play around with the flow before ever investing your energy into building a slide. So here's how you do it. First, start with the main idea of your presentation and a stack of sticky notes. What's the one thing that you want your audience to remember if they recall nothing else? Tell them that right up front. That's your first sticky note. Remember to use you-related words so you're speaking directly to the audience. And then break that main idea into sub-ideas that will form the flow of the presentation. Write one sub-idea per sticky note and put them up on the wall in order. Now, play around with the order until you're comfortable that it flows well. Eliminate any sub-ideas that aren't critical to supporting the main idea. Now, this would be a great time to get the help from a trusted colleague to test the flow of your ideas. Then use different colored sticky notes to write down what you will use to reinforce each sub-idea. Now, this could be a chart, a graph, an image, or just a story that you'll tell. And then remember your conclusion and reinforce your main idea again. That will be your last sticky note. Now, you have your outline for your presentation, and now you may open PowerPoint. But before you do, there are some other cool tools out there like Prezi, Powtoon, SlideRocket, and Amaze that are worth considering. Now, whatever tool you select, create your individual slides according to your storyboard. Consider using full bleed images to evoke emotions. It's far more powerful for a slide to contain a single image without words than a smaller image with a header, footer, logo, and a word box. You might even wish to use multiple full bleed images to support a sub-idea. Some of the best TED slides use no words at all. Also, remember what we learned about the croc brain needing to see or hear something new and fresh in order to get attention for higher level processing. The same thing applies to your images. So don't just use the same old images everyone else does. Be creative. Think of unique images that could evoke emotional moments for your audience. You might even have some original ones to share. And then carefully select your fonts. Don't just use the Times New Roman default. We're bored with that already. Google free fonts and you'll see several websites where you can download fonts, install them in your presentation software, and make your slides pop. Choose a font that reflects the overall feeling of your presentation, whether it's fun, serious, modern, trendy, or traditional. Now, don't go crazy though. Choose only 2 fonts for your entire presentation, one for the headings and one for the text. But do play around with font sizes, even within a sentence, to emphasize keywords and certain points. You can make some words a larger font in order to make them pop a little bit more off of the slide. Now, most importantly, design for the back of the room. Oh, and if you copy paste something into a quote into a slide, go back and check the font size and the style to make it consistent with the rest of the presentation, because that's something that often messes up. And then thirdly, design with an artistic eye. Presentation expert and author Akash Karla refers to several design rules that should be applied to slides, and here's some of them. The first is the rule of thirds. This is kind of interesting. Divide your slide into 3 sections horizontally and vertically. Now, studies show that our eyes will gravitate to the points of intersection, so that's where we should place our key elements. And then second, empty space. Just like good advertising, a slide should make use of empty space for balance. There's one more use for PowerPoint that will allow you to put more information on a slide, and that is a one-pager that you might use for a face-to-face meeting or for a leave behind. I used to do this a lot when meeting with senior executives, where the format of the meeting was more of a discussion which I needed to guide. I'd prepare a single chart or a graphic image with the areas for discussion and the flow, and I'd print that one page to facilitate the meeting. Now, the executive could give the page a quick once-over and be comfortable that we would cover the topics of interest. They'd know that the discussion would be focused and organized, and then they'd just be able to relax and be more open to the conversation. The executive would also have a leave behind to later remember the key messages in the event that perhaps he or she was distracted at any point during the conversation. Now, if you're presenting to a smaller room or one where it will be advantageous to maintain eye contact, there's several other options for visual aids that might be preferable to presentation slides. First, you can consider charts, graphs, or images mounted on foam board. Now, ideally, this should be few in number, so 1 to 3 would be ideal, but this is a wonderful approach for smaller groups, workshops, and other intimate settings. So let's say you offer a service that has 3 steps to discuss. Have a graphic artist create a compelling visual outlining the 3 steps and have it laminated onto a piece of foam board where you can either support it on a flip chart easel or use it with one of those floating cardboard stands like you see on the back of some picture frames. And have the foam boards turned around when your audience enters the room so that they can't see them, and then flip them when you're ready to speak about each part of the topic. Now, as you speak, leave that foam board with the beautiful side facing the group, and you'll find that rather than the electronic approach of moving from one slide and idea to the next, leaving a visual aid displayed will help tie your message together. It also can help to create suspense before the boards are flipped, as well as put the audience at ease that they aren't about to sit through 50 slides. Second, consider whiteboards or flip charts. Now, sometimes your presentation needs to take on a creative feel where the participation of the audience will influence the outcome, and by design, you want people to feel engaged and part of the process. Now, don't mistake this approach for going in unprepared. You must still storyboard the flow of the meeting and have in your mind how you will utilize various visual approaches on the whiteboard in order to flow the meeting to meet your objectives. Now, I've used this approach successfully when facilitating workshops, even though I provided my team with our notes in advance regarding precisely which exercises and activities we would take the group through and when. There was certainly flexibility built into the process, but our cheat sheets were invaluable. I've also found that when soliciting feedback from a smaller group, having them write their ideas on sticky notes and then categorizing them together on flip charts taped to the wall as a group can be really, really useful. Also consider video. Now, the beauty of video is that you can pre-select emotionally stimulating content to introduce or reinforce your message. Plus, it gives your audience a break from hearing your voice. The variety will help enhance interest, which is required for attention. Now, before showing the video, unless it's the introduction to your presentation, remember to tell the audience what they should be looking for and keep the clip brief. Now, last week I shared with you the example of Seth Godin crushing a light bulb in a red velvet bag to emphasize his point about how the Jewish faith used this action as a metaphor for change during the wedding ceremony. Props can be useful and help stimulate the audience's interest when used carefully. But I've also seen several presenters pass props around during their talk. Now, I generally recommend against this since people will spend time looking at the prop, even if they're only being polite, and during this time they'll completely miss what you're saying. But props that you use or hold as you move around the room can be highly valuable. If you do use props, make sure they're relevant to the point you're making, that everyone in the audience can see them, and don't overuse them. You don't want your presentation to be confused with a circus, unless of course your topic is a circus, in which case it could be fine. Make sure your prop will work and have a backup just in case. Finally, keep your props hidden until needed so they can provide the right level of emphasis. Some great examples of using props were Bill Gates releasing mosquitoes in the crowd to talk about malaria. That's definitely one that you want to Google. And when Steve Jobs presented the MacBook Air. You'll also find a great example if you Google Chris Bishop using the swinging ball of death to demonstrate one of the laws of physics. Now, don't try this at home unless you happen to be really good at physics. Your final step in using visual aids is practice, practice, practice. Now, I like practicing out loud in front of a mirror. Even if you think you know your content, saying it out loud is completely different. You need to be comfortable with the flow, practice your pacing, time yourself. You'll typically go much longer than you think, and work on your intonation to make it interesting. Practice in front of the dog, friends, or your significant other. Turn off the radio and practice in the car as you're driving around town. Just don't look away and look at your notes. Continue to refine your message and how you present. I'll talk more about that in an upcoming module. Now, when we get to a future module in the course, you'll also record your pitch on video for you to practice and review. Now, this won't be a full 20-minute presentation, but rather just your 5-minute or less summary that will utilize the structure, tips, and the tricks that you've learned. To begin to prepare, your homework from this module will be to start your thought process on storyboarding that pitch by focusing on your key messages. And then next time, we'll talk more about providing an incentive for your prospects to go for the prize. But first, here are your action steps from this module. Number 1, think about what we've discussed so far in this course and respond with how you would prepare your pitch. Now, when you speak to a room full of prospects, what's the one main idea that you want them to remember about you? Secondly, if you're giving a 5-minute overview of your services, would you use visual aids? If so, what would you use and how would you use it? Thirdly, if you're giving a 20-minute workshop or presentation for the purpose of selling your services, what would be your topic? You may have several in mind, but choose one that you believe would generate the most interest in what you do. And then for that 20-minute workshop presentation, would you use visual aids? And if so, what would you use and how? That's your practice for this module. I'll see you in the next one.